He was perhaps the single greatest battlefield commander of Japan's Sengoku period, a man revered as the god of war, an avatar of the war god Bishamonten. He fought over 70 battles and never lost a single one of significance. His name was Uesugi Kenshin. Yet, when he died, the nation was not united under his banner. The ultimate prize, the rule of Japan, slipped through his fingers, claimed instead by the very rivals he had bested on the field. Kenshin was the equal of Takeda Shingen and the one-man Oda Nobunaga, the great unifier, truly feared. His tactical genius was undisputed. How then did the most brilliant strategist of the age fail in the ultimate strategic objective? His failure was not born of tactical error or a lack of resources. It was born of a paradox. His greatest proclaimed strength, his deep, unyielding piety and devotion to honor, would become his single greatest strategic weakness. The story of Uesugi Kenshin is not the story of a warrior defeated by his enemies, but of a brilliant mind, paralyzed by his own virtue. Stay with us as we deconstruct the internal conflict that kept the god of war from his throne. The year is 1561. Uesugi Kenshin, at the head of a massive coalition, has swept through the Kanto region. He stands before the walls of Odawara Castle, the impregnable stronghold of his rivals, the Hojo clan. He has brought them to the brink of annihilation. Victory is not just possible, it is probable. The gateway to central Japan lies open, and then he stops. His allies bicker. His vassals, landowners from his home province of Echigo, grow restless, worried about their own distant lands. A threat, perhaps real, perhaps perceived, emerges from his other great rival, Takeda Shingen, far to the west. A true strategist, a man bent on conquest like Oda Nobunaga, would have ignored these distractions. He would have masked his flanks, assaulted the castle, and broken the Hojo clan forever. Kenshin did not. His decisive move was a staggering retreat, bound by a rigid code that demanded he protect his vassals' interests and act only with righteous cause. He abandoned the single greatest strategic opportunity of his career. He turned his army around and marched home. The campaign dissolved. His enemies, watching from the walls of Odawara, were not defeated. They were merely inconvenienced. This was Kenshin's fatal pattern. Time and again, this tactical lion would prove to be a strategic lamb, launching brilliant, devastating campaigns only to be paralyzed by his own meticulous conscience. He was a man who waged war, not to conquer, but to punish, correct, or restore. How did it come to this? To understand the trap Kenshin built for himself, we must first understand the mind of the man who set it. To understand Uesugi Kenshin's strategy, we must abandon the analogy of a chess game. A chess master plays to checkmate, to win the entire board. Kenshin did not. His strategic framework was that of a righteous crusader, a divine enforcer. His guiding principle was not conquest, it was restoration. He did not seek to seize Japan for himself, but to punish those who transgressed against established order and to restore the correct balance of power. This singular worldview, fueled by his devotion to the war god Bishamonten, created a predictable and ultimately self-defeating loop, a trap of his own making. The Kenshin strategic model worked in a precise three-act chain. Act 1 was the justification. Kenshin would not mobilize his formidable army for personal gain. He required a casus belli, a righteous cause. This usually came as a desperate plea from a neighboring lord being crushed by an aggressor, or from the refugee shogun, Ashikaga Yoshiaki, begging him to march on Kyoto and punish the usurper Oda Nobunaga. For Kenshin, war was a moral imperative, a duty to his gods and his titles, specifically his role as Kanto Kenrei, the shogun's deputy, in the Kanto region. Act 2 was the crusade. Once justified, Kenshin moved with unparalleled speed and tactical brilliance. He was a master of logistics, mobilization, and battlefield psychology. His Echigo warriors, famously disciplined, would descend from their northern province like an avalanche. As we saw at Odawara, or in his legendary duels with Takeda Shingen, Kenshin would outmaneuver, outthink, and often shatter his opponents on the field. He would prove, unequivocally, that he was the superior commander and that his cause was divinely favored. But it is in Act 3 that the trap sprung shut. This was the withdrawal. Having defeated his enemy in the field, having punished the transgressor, and restored the wronged lord to his lands, Kenshin's objective was complete. In his mind, justice had been served. The thought of occupying the enemy's territory, of seizing their castles, and absorbing their lands into his own domain was an act of greed. It was the very sin he was fighting against. This piety was compounded by a practical problem: his vassals. They were loyal to him, but their power was based in Echigo. They had no interest in long-term campaigns of occupation far from home. And so, having won the war, Kenshin would simply leave. This is the master plan deconstructed. It was a perfect system for policing Japan, but a terrible one for conquering it. His rivals, men like Takeda Shingen and Oda Nobunaga, understood this perfectly. They were not crusaders, they were warlords. They operated on a brutal, rational logic of expansion and consolidation. They knew that Kenshin's virtue made him predictable. They only had to survive his initial brilliant assault, retreat behind their walls, and wait. They knew his moral code, and his restless vassals would eventually compel him to turn back. He would win the battle, and they would win the war. Kenshin's strategy was a revolving door. He would arrive, dispense justice, and leave, only for the sinners to rebuild their strength, confident that the god of war would not permanently depose them. It is 1577. Oda Nobunaga, the Demon King, has consolidated central Japan. His vast modern armies, armed with thousands of arquebuses, seem invincible. He dispatches his most trusted general, Shibata Katsuie, at the head of a massive 50,000-man army to conquer Kenshin's northern domain. Nobunaga himself follows behind. The Oda forces are arrogant, masters of a new way of war, and they believe Kenshin is nothing but an old-world relic. Kenshin, with a smaller, more traditional army, waits for them. He has chosen his battlefield, the Tedori River, a wide, treacherous waterway swollen by autumn rains. The psychological tension is palpable. Katsuie sees Kenshin's smaller force and prepares for a straightforward, crushing assault. He believes his superior numbers and firearms will simply overwhelm the god of war. Kenshin, ever the master of his opponent's mind, understands this arrogance. He knows Nobunaga's generals are aggressive, and he will use that aggression as a weapon against them. This will not be a battle of attrition, it will be an execution. Kenshin begins with a masterful feint. He detaches a small force and moves them visibly, creating the illusion that he is splitting his army, perhaps to reinforce a nearby fortress. He plants rumors that he is overmatched and considering a retreat. Katsuie, eager to land a killing blow, takes the bait. He orders his entire army to advance and cross the Tedori River at night to launch a decisive dawn attack. This is the precise moment Kenshin has been waiting for. The Oda army, tens of thousands strong, plunges into the cold, fast-moving water, their formations breaking, their gunpowder dampening, their focus entirely on the crossing. Then, the trap springs. As the Oda vanguard struggles to gain the opposite bank, Kenshin unleashes hell. he has not retreated. His main force, hidden and waiting, slams into the disorganized Oda troops as they emerge from the river. But this is only one part of the trap. Kenshin, a master of terrain, had earlier ordered the river's dikes to be broken. A torrent of water, a man-made flash flood, surges down the riverbed. The effect is catastrophic. Entire regiments of Oda samurai and ashigaru are swept away, drowned by the current before they can even draw their swords. In the midst of this chaos, Kenshin's pincer closes. His detached force, having circled around, now appears from the darkness to strike the Oda army from the rear. Katsui's forces are not fighting a battle. They are caught in a slaughterhouse. Trapped between Kenshin's elite warriors to their front, a flanking force at their back, and an impassable, murderous river at their flanks, the Oda army disintegrates. The invincible gun corps of Nobunaga are rendered useless, their powder wet, their lines broken. Kenshin's warriors, wielding spear and sword, cut them down in the darkness. By morning, the scale of the victory is clear. Katsui has fled in a panic, his army annihilated. Thousands of Oda soldiers lie dead in the river and on its banks. It is one of the most one-sided defeats Oda Nobunaga would ever suffer. Kenshin, by perfectly reading his opponent's psychology and mastering the battlefield's environment, had delivered his final, undisputed masterpiece. He had proven, once again, that he was the greatest tactical mind of his generation. But this brilliant victory would, tragically, be his last. The victory at Tedorigawa was so total, so brilliant, that it has created one of the most enduring myths of the Sengoku period, that Uesugi Kenshin, the god of war, was an unstoppable force of divine justice. We are led to believe that his piety was the source of his strength. But when we analyze the data, when we look at the entire arc of his career, the opposite truth reveals itself. Kenshin's piety was not his greatest strength. It was his most profound and crippling strategic weakness. It was a psychological prison that prevented him from achieving the very thing his genius put within his grasp: the unification of Japan. Let us deconstruct the psychology of Kenshin's command. He truly believed himself to be an avatar of Bishamonten, a divine enforcer of order. This created a paralyzing internal conflict. To win a battle was a righteous act of punishment, but to conquer, to depose a rival daimyo, seize his lands, and absorb his domain was an act of personal greed. It was a betrayal of the very divine identity he had constructed for himself. His entire career is a testament to this paralysis. He marched on Kyoto not to become shogun, but to restore the shogun. He attacked the Hojo not to take the Kanto, but to punish them for overstepping. His rivals operated under no such illusions. Oda Nobunaga was a revolutionary, driven by a vision of Tenka Fubu, a realm united by force. He saw the old order as a rotten structure to be burned to the ground, and he was willing to be the arsonist. Takeda Shingen was a ruthless pragmatist, expanding his domain inch by bloody inch. These men saw war as a tool for acquisition and power. Kenshin saw it as a tool for moral correction. His enemies only needed to weather his righteous fury, retreat behind their walls, and wait for Kenshin's internal conflict and his restless vassals, who gained no new territory from these moral crusades, to force him to go home. The decisive factors in Kenshin's ultimate failure, therefore, were not tactical. His brilliance at Tedorigawa was undeniable, a perfect synthesis of intelligence, mastery of terrain, and psychological warfare. The decisive factor was a complete absence of strategic ambition. He was a man attempting to solve a 16th century problem of national anarchy with a 12th century code of chivalry. He was, in effect, the greatest general in Japan who did not actually want to win the war. His personal honor was more important to him than the national prize. Kenshin's magnificent victory at Tedorigawa should have been the turning point in his war against Oda Nobunaga. It was his masterpiece, a victory so total it sent a shockwave of fear through Nobunaga's domain. Kenshin immediately began preparations for his greatest campaign yet, a massive, decisive march west, leveraging his new alliance with the Mori clan. His goal was no longer just to punish, but to finally destroy Nobunaga and liberate Kyoto. The nation held its breath, awaiting the clash of the two greatest titans of the age. And then, in the winter of 1578, mere months after his triumph, Uesugi Kenshin died suddenly, not in battle, but in his own castle. He was 48. The grand campaign never began. The threat to Nobunaga evaporated overnight. The true tragic legacy of Kenshin's piety was revealed in the immediate aftermath of his death. His devotion was a personal, non-transferable virtue. Believing himself a divine avatar, he had never married and had no biological children. He had instead adopted two heirs, his nephew, Uesugi Kagekatsu, and Uesugi Kagetora, a son of his former arch-rivals, the Hojo clan. In a final catastrophic failure of strategic planning, Kenshin failed to definitively name which of them would rule. The moment he died, his retainers split into two factions, and the domain exploded into a brutal civil war known as the Oda no Ran. For over a year, Kenshin's house tore itself apart. This conflict was a bloody refutation of his life's work. When Kagekatsu finally emerged victorious, he inherited a clan that was a shadow of its former self, financially ruined, militarily decimated, and politically broken. Kenshin's life had been spent policing his rivals, but he had failed to police his own house. Much is made of Kenshin's piety, but we often overlook the source of his wealth. While he cultivated the image of an ascetic monk warrior, Kenshin was also a brilliant administrator. His home province of Echigo produced a high-quality hemp textile known as Echigo Fu. Kenshin recognized this as a vital strategic asset. He centralized its production and trade, creating a massive stream of revenue that funded his legendary campaigns. The god of war was, it turns out, also one of Japan's most successful textile barons. His great rival, Takeda Shingen, had died years earlier, his own ambitions cut short. When Kenshin learned of Shingen's death, he famously wept, mourning the loss of his greatest foe. With Kenshin's own death, there was no one left to weep for him, only to fight over the scraps of his legacy. History shows us that great power, when bound to the virtue of a single person, is a fragile thing. When the individual falls, the empire they built not on systems, but on ideals, often crumbles to dust